All right, everybody. If I could get everybody's attention, please. We're about to start the presentation. So, a couple things to go over before the presentation starts. This is a catch box. At all, when you have a question or a comment, just, Clay, if you could to whoever raises their hand for a question or a comment, if you're comfortable.
All right, yeah.
And then hold it really close to your face, like way closer than you think you have to, because this is going to allow our friends on the stream to hear the question that you're asking. So, as an example, hey, Adam. Nah, you're talking. I'm going to throw this at you. Act like you have a question. You have a question? Awesome.
All right.
Little closer to your face?
Little closer to the face?
Yes, perfect. William is a perfect example.
All right.
Close to your face, and then everyone will hear your lovely voices.
It's not going to pick me up. Can I just put it over here by the...
Yeah, and it'll be like partially muted too.
All right.
So, we should be all good to start. Take it away.
Is that my cue?
Yes, take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and especially Right Brain here, who's been, I know, running this for a long time. Has been one of our key partners in the area, and has really kept this going since COVID kind of threw everybody for a loop. I know it's probably not in good taste to bring that word up, but I remember kind of what happened before COVID and now after, and we're still trying to get this thing going. So for everybody, all you guys that came out to be with us tonight, thank you so much. My name is Clay Graham. I am a senior solution architect with Amazon Web Services, where I have been for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years in. Am I muted? It'll be 5 years in. You need that for sure. Take a break. Can you pull it off there? Yep. Test, hello. We good? Check. 1, 2, 3.
Good enough, I guess.
Good enough, I guess. All right, this could be this mic. Where was I? Clay Graham is my name. SA with AWS for 5 years. I have been in IT in the Michigan area for a lot longer than that, right? So, without dating myself, I've been at Ford. I spent some time at General Motors consulting. I went over to General Electric. I was in the old Visteon Center for about a decade. I'll tell you that much. Started with AWS, like I said, right before COVID. Worked with customers, started in Greenfield here. Worked with a lot of different customers who were starting their AWS journey, and have since moved into the enterprise / automotive and manufacturing sector, where my main customer now is actually a large industrial out of Chicago. In addition to being SA for the automotive and industrial, automotive and manufacturing, I am a member of what we are now calling the Next Generation Developer Experience Technical Field Community in AWS. So while we work, kind of our day jobs for a lot of us in the enterprise SA space is to go really get deep with our customers, right, and kind of work with them as they move to the cloud, right? They always incentivize us to go off and get in the spot where we can influence the service teams over at Amazon that are building these products, make sure that we give them the voice of the customer, make sure that we can guide those products. So for us, it gives us a chance to, work with a lot of different customers in a lot of different areas just by representing the product space. Yep.
I don't know what's going on here. It was working for you.
Yep, hello. So we can work with a lot of different customers in the product space but also gives me the ability to keep the saw sharp, right? So I came from a development background. I did a ton of web dev. I was doing web dev at GE, right? Very, very long background in actually delivering applications. This is a talk I've been workshopping a little bit. I think when we put the thing out, we said we called it mastering multi-account environments or something like that. I'm actually, I don't know where you guys are at. I'm going to start at the basics, kind of. I'm going to do the history of CI/CD and AWS. I'm going to kind of frame it out as the problem where we are, right? The kind of how things went after the first initial stage where everything was hunky-dory. Specifically, I don't want to spoil everything, but like, I feel like the whole multi-account thing threw a lot of people for a loop, right? Just as it became more mainstream, it became a lot more challenging for the way we did CI/CD, especially if you're moving from like a data center, right? And then I'm going to try to simplify, give you some of the approaches that we have and what we see other customers doing. And then hopefully, I'm going to throw a little curveball demo at you guys and show you how I think we can simplify it. And there's a service that might be a little bit under the radar that will simplify things. That will be a demo. I wasn't sure if everybody being laptops or not. What I'll show you is, I think, something you'll be able to easily duplicate. After that, so we have the question and answer box. I'll stick around for a little bit to answer questions if you guys have any other ones, because I'm going to try to move pretty quickly through this one. Okay, microphone is good, I think, now. All right, so I'm going to start at the beginning. For some of you that are in AWS, this is going to be very reductive, but almost every time I went into a customer when I started, and you would say AWS account, they would just, it would like, they think there would be confusion because account meant 50 different things, right? So what we mean in an AWS account space, it's going to baseline this here, so bear with me. It is a resource boundary for everything that you deploy. So when AWS started, and one of our core messages is really still, you can go global in minutes, right? So an AWS account gives you the ability to put infrastructure and services around the globe, anywhere you want them. It's a really, really powerful thing. It can scale out pretty well to an extent, right? There are lots of internal quotas and stuff that you have to navigate that at scale can become a problem, and that's where we do see a little bit of friction and why we've evolved the architecture where we have as we've scaled and our customers have scaled. But the important thing about the account is like everybody has one, right? It's like the little house that you have. So Amazon has one. Amazon actually has many, right? Netflix, all the customers have one, two, potentially many accounts. A single AWS account is tied with a single email address. So you probably all have one. If you don't, it's pretty easy to sign up with just a credit card. I was working with somebody just a minute ago to get them registered. But they are like little kind of walled off gardens where our customers can put their infrastructure. Okay, and when I started with AWS, that was kind of like because they were so scalable and powerful and you could just load them up and take a data center and put an AWS account, right? That was kind of what we wanted to do when we first started with AWS. With that context, I just go, what is CI/CD and like how does it map into AWS? Again, real quick for those that haven't lived in this space. There are basically three practices that we talk about in CI/CD. It's been abbreviated to CI/CD, but it's kind of three distinct ideas. First is the process of continuous integration. That is really taking software from development to test suites, right? So it's the idea that as your developers, right, so you are introducing new code, introducing changes to a project, that they are, test cases are automatically running for those developers. Now, ideally, it's done in such a way that the developers can innovate really quickly and get really, really quick feedback, right? They're not sitting around and waiting for the test cases. They're not waiting for somebody else to run those test cases for them, right? And there's maybe they can move on to another thing and then get the results of those test cases and double back. So you want that to be something that's really quick, off the developer's radar, but you need that feedback to come to the developers quickly. So this is something that if you have a big team, right, it's very important to them. Gives them the ability to address bugs quicker, improve software quality. I mean, it's pretty much been shown from when I started, right, that it improves software quality. Automating test cases, if you've been in a big project, right, you understand the importance of that, right? And that's one of the things I personally try to sell every time I'm working with a project, right? I made it kind of my ambition, right, to really advocate for spending the time doing test case automation when I was kind of growing up through my role. Continuous delivery, then, is the process of taking that production app and moving it onto those deployed environments, right? So once the integration test pass, generally, you then start to put it into a integration test environment, right? So generally, we're talking about dev and staging environments, and just moving those software packages there. And that's when you might have automated test cases, you might have some manual test cases, you might get the business involved in those scenarios, right? And then continuous deployment is the last piece of that. And this is the concept of actually then automating those deployments into production environments, right? And if you follow through, and this is kind of a 3-step process, so if you do the first 2 steps right, you get your business comfortable with the quality of your software, the velocity of the software. It takes a lot of practice for them, usually. You can get to this part of continuous deployment. AWS, if you work with us for a long time, you know that this is a practice that we do, right? Like, we do a lot. Amazon.com is pushing famously like 1,000 changes into production a day. And part of that, it took us a long journey to get there. But that's where we are. What AWS introduces in that process is the ability to do things like canary deployments, where you have like a service that maybe only 5 to 10% of your users get in production, right? And then they look and they go, okay, is there any errors coming out of this? And if you see any errors in those 5 or 10% of those users, you can roll it back. That's called like a canary deployment. We also offer blue-green deployments if you've done that, right? So you would build you have one system that's called your user production. We call it blue. You build a whole separate system over here, right? It's green, and then you swap all your traffic. And again, what makes sense here that you can do. Don't have any slides. I'm just talking in the vernacular. We can come back and talk this deeper if we need to. What you can do in the blue-green scenario is you can, just cut over all your traffic at once. You can maybe swing some of your users over here and slowly ramp those up on production. And then when you feel good about this new parallel environment, you just turn this other one off. And the cloud really made that possible for all those users. If you guys have been working in AWS, these are probably really standard practices for you now. So that's CI/CD. When we call CI/CD, it's the practice of continuous integration and sometimes continuous delivery, sometimes continuous deployment. A lot of times, right, customers are going to want to have a manual step in there for production. They need it for compliance reasons or to make the business feel comfortable, or there's some deeper set of integration testing that you want to do. So when we say CI/CD, we're really talking about developer software, automated pipelines, automated testing, and some degree of automated deployment into environments that are production-like or close enough that you can operate with them. Assuming no questions, I just really want to show this last piece. Okay, there's production. That's exactly what I just talked about here. And again, this iterates over the conversations I had. When you're in development, you need things to go fast. You're working at the code level. You're defining your dependencies, publishing them for review. And then what I wanted to get to here is the output of the development stage is your automated unit tests. You're usually packaging your artifacts up. We have a few services for those. And then this is the final step of, if you have ever worked with or looked at the Amazon Builders Library or kind of built software in Amazon, you'll be familiar with the beta, the gamma, and production. This is basically how we build services. This is how the internal teams that are building services and deploying services in AWS and Amazon operate, right? So if you get down to the deployment pipeline, it's kind of 3 stages. The beta, which is you can have internal service teams testing, but it's for smoke testing, and you're not going to have anything other than internal integrations reliant on that. The Gamma environment is usually very isolated, but it's prod-like. So you start to introduce cross-application dependencies in Gamma. And then the production is generally in Amazon. There's a whole other story about how we manage production rollouts. It's in the builders library. Give you a hint on that, but it's generally region by region, and there's usually stages, okay? Because software release at Amazon Web Services, for instance, can go across the globe into 20 some different regions, 30 some different regions, and looking for any reason to fail. So along the way, at each step of this, there's going to be canary test cases and synthetics, right? And if anything starts going wrong, we will be pretty aggressive generally about rolling those things back, figuring out what went wrong, and fixing them. So there's part of this pipeline. There's a lot of automation and a lot of steps and a lot of stages and a lot of engineering that goes into what I'll call kind of the base pipeline that we have from AWS. And it's a pattern that has a lot of our customers use, has been successful for them. It's not the easiest pattern to implement because we built it at scale. So if you look at how it became implemented in AWS vernacular, right? AWS is, I think we've been really, really good at these building block of services, right? So we split them up mentally into these 4, or I'm going to introduce a 5th area here in a minute, to speak to it briefly. The author, the source management or the artifact management, the build and test services, and then our deployment service, which is kind of not used as much as you would think it is, but is still there today for certain things. So on the author side, we have all the SDKs, we have IDE plugins, we have our own cloud-based IDE, which is Cloud9, and we also, I have to mention QDeveloper, which is our generative AI developer toolkit. We're going to be talking about that, I believe, if everything goes good, next session or in a month, right, with Jacob. So the more to come on that one. The source artifact code commit is our managed Git repository. Code artifact, is our basically artifact repository, can be used like a Maven or an NPM private kind of used artifactory for anything like that. That's what's there. ECR is Elastic Container Registry for dropping your container images in, and then CodeGuru is our AI code review process, right? So we trained an AI on the results of like 15 years of our internal Java code reviews, and we package it up for our customers to use. That's just for managing the developer kind of lifecycle, right? So the developer writes code, commits it to code commit, our GitHub repo. This is all within AWS, right? And then can generate libraries, put them in code artifact for other developers to use, can generate Docker images if you're into the container world, right? Drop those in ECR and use CodeGuru if they need any kind of code review. Now, when you get to the building, automated testing, deployment, that's generally on a code build. A code build was really the first OG kind of service that we had. You specify your build paths in like YAML files and set those up. Code deploy was a tool that we used to basically blast output from code build or other build tools out to like on-prem servers. So we still use today if like we build something in the cloud and it needs to be blasted out to like the edge, right? In the edge, you think about all the I don't know, I'm not saying they still use it today, but one of the big use cases was the fulfillment centers, right, that we had. As we continue to expand our global footprint, code deploy used to just blast the code out. If you're deploying in the cloud, generally you can use code build to deploy, or what you can kind of see on the top here is code pipeline. Code pipeline came a little bit later, but we're still talking, these services are still, I might be wrong, but I'm gonna say 2020, which was an eon, forever ago in the cloud, maybe 2019. Code pipeline just kind of lays over the top of this. It helps you connect the source and the code build and the deployment, and kind of orchestrates how all that stuff works. Everybody use this to some extent? Anybody use this stuff to some extent? Okay, some, yeah, some. All right. On top of this, over the years, right? So I'll call this out because this part gets missed a ton. To make this whole pipeline work, I see customers all the time get this stuff to working, and then they put their apps in production, but they don't have a good feedback loop for what happens in production. This monitoring step becomes really important, and for some reason, when you have developers move stuff into production, it usually gets left out until they start having production problems and they realize they didn't instrument any of this stuff. So it is part of generally what we do, or what we advise as part of the pipeline. End-to-end process, CloudWatch is our monitoring service, monitors everything you do in AWS, collects logs, collects a lot of metrics from our services. Those are usually there for you guys, or for people that deploy applications in AWS. How you make use of them is up to you, but it's a very, very powerful monitoring and orchestration tool. And then X-ray is that piece that developers usually don't think they need, but it is a end-to-end tracing information. So you kind of insert the library in the application. The application developers have to do something usually. It's not a ton anymore, right? Maybe they annotate some of the methods, they import a library or two, and it will generate traces as it goes through. So if you really start having problems, right, or if you want to see how your application is performing, if it's a distributed application, right, that X-ray data, it becomes really invaluable for the just to figure out what's going wrong. Seeing this pattern a lot, where the step gets missed, and ultimately in production, everything fails all the time. I think that was the reinvent tagline at Werner in 2018. It does, right? So especially as you build apps, your infrastructure will ultimately fail. Something weird will happen with your app, some off dependency you didn't test for, and you will appreciate having those X-ray traces in CloudWatch. Anyway, okay, last piece of the history of AWS is that we actually made it really, really easy to build this stuff out. So there's a whole ton of services, right? So a lot of my job is understanding all these different services, being able to at least tell you the two sentences about what they're about, and then knowing how they can integrate together, whether they work together, right, what the edge conditions are. A lot of AWS architectures that we're going to see in a minute really rely on the architect, myself, yourselves, right, to build, to put all these different boxes together and make them work. What we did as we launched this one, especially with Code Pipeline, is we started really investing into infrastructure as code to make the pipeline journey easier for our customers. So all the, and this, I mean, if once you get into over the hump of CloudFormation, right, and you start to understand the power of infrastructure as code, you become a believer for life, right? I think if anybody's taken that journey, you know the power of it, right? Of having a text file that represents your infrastructure, and the beauty of that, along with automated testing, right? For me, that was a real eye-opener. CloudFormation was the first one. I really, really fell in love with the Cloud Development Kit. If you don't like templates, or you're like me, CloudFormation development is slow. The CDK, which basically takes CloudFormation templates, wraps a TypeScript API around it, right? So you can build all, or Java or Python, not just TypeScript, whatever language you're comfortable in, you can actually build your infrastructure as code in that coding language, and then use that to compile the CloudFormation or generate the CloudFormation templates. Super, super powerful. Anybody use CDK in here at all? Yep, 1, 2, okay, you know the power, right, of that. If you're in infrastructure as code, just start there, right? Start there, right? If you want to know infrastructure as code in AWS, start there. Serverless application model, another thing for Lambdas. And then AWS Amplify, another service I'd love to talk to you guys about, because we just did a generation 2. Everybody kind of was like, it's not good. But now we actually put a lot of effort into the next generation of that. Maybe I'll come back and talk to you about that. But what these were is just like kind of easy buttons for implementing infrastructure, building pipelines, right? So we might take a, CDK has this concept of constructs, right? So each service would have maybe a level 1 construct or a level 2, like it's kind of three tiers, right? Level 1 is the CloudFormation mapping, direct to CloudFormation. Level 2 is going to be service-based, but a little bit more smarts built into it. And then the next level is what we call these CDK constructs, is a bunch of services that have all the integrations between services together. And that's not an easy thing to do even within the context of an AWS account, generally, because if you've done it before, you know where I'm going, right? Like the services, AWS is a fail secure. So the services basically have to be explicitly authorized to talk to each other. And so you basically not only are saying, these are the services I want, you're defining the integration points, and then you kind of have to wrap the security mechanisms for each line that you draw between the services. There's a security overlay that you have to worry about, right? And maybe an encryption key that you have to worry about. So this model, this lower layer of infrastructure as code, makes things easier. And it is kind of easier, right, to build this stuff, to build a basic, I'm going to say basic pipeline, basic powerful pipeline. One condition, right, is that works if it's in a single AWS account. Because that was our container, that was the basic, structure of where all these services work. Most of these services work, as resources in your AWS account, maybe in a region. So you can have a different code commit in US East 1 or North Virginia region. You can have a different one in Oregon or US West 2. You can have one over in Frankfurt, Germany. They're all unique repositories, all live in your same account, but that account is segregated off from the rest of the world by default, right? And those GitHub repos, or those code commit repositories, I say GitHub, it's code commit, are logically distinct. Now maybe we give you tools to copy and clone those, right, across regions. And as you'll see, we do have patterns for actually moving those across accounts now. But that all gets fairly complicated pretty quick. So that's the baseline. That's, I think, where we were maybe 5 years ago, right, at the basis of our developer experience platform. Stop for questions on that one. All right, so this all runs really good. And what I'll take you through that I saw kind of starting, there's a few trends. So the first is really DevOps became a business, right? I think if you look at it, it was driven by really public cloud. So public cloud is just pulling stuff out of the internal data centers. And so, not only if you were in an AWS, but you were also worried about how to build things internal to your data center. When I started, right, we had Jenkins. Jenkins, I think, is like the OG of tools, right? But what we had is we had a private cloud, and every little project could spin up its own Jenkins instance because we couldn't figure out how to share it because you had to put the plugins in. Nobody could consensus on the plugins. Didn't make sense. So before we went to the public cloud, a project I was in, the #1 server that we had deployed was Jenkins servers, right? They did it. You had the project, you had the project teams, you figured out how to make the little Jenkins server do everything, right? So it was running cron jobs, it was doing operational reporting and dashboarding, all your builds. I mean, there was a lot of wacky stuff. But yeah, so as that is happening, right, I think DevOps really became a business, right? It was one of those things that the world attached onto, and so we came up with a lot of these services that some of you guys probably use. They're probably really powerful services, right? So, but they were all just this whole upheaval of like, where do applications live? And specifically, right, I think GitHub, hugely powerful tool, right? Like everybody, I think, has experience with GitHub. Now, I see enterprises are adopting today, right? Like the growth of that, and that to me is just indicative of just like how I feel about public cloud and a lot of these services. But that steadily upward spiral, if you read their yearly releases, just the people they're pulling on from Africa and all these different countries, right? Very amazing growth story for them. And the way that they have moved into the enterprise and the way that enterprises have worked with these cloud providers and worked with us, AWS and GitHub specifically, to really make sure those controls are in place and they were comfortable with the services. It was 10 years ago. I'm not going to name his name. I sat across from a guy who was the CISO, and he said, public cloud will never, ever do what we want it to do, ever, right? And 2 years later, they were moving applications into AWS, and that was kind of the famous, they moved the first 50 apps, and they went, oh, it can do it, right? And then they're one of the biggest AWS customers today. And I think we see the same way with GitHub, right? So people saying source control's got to be in, but now I see a lot of enterprises being comfortable with GitHub specifically. So I'm going to double back on GitHub. I put that chart in there for a reason. The reason is because I think a lot of people are probably using GitHub to build, right? Second, all right, so programming languages also explode, right? So we used to do everything in Java or .NET, and then somebody said to me, programming language doesn't matter, right? Now we have containers. Docker is a big thing. Doesn't matter what you program in. It does if you're building it, right? So containers okay, but you got to build it sometimes. Mobile, I think, drove a lot of stuff too, right? Because we had to start. It wasn't just Internet Explorer and Chrome. You had to start testing in all sorts of different variants of devices and device sizes and all that stuff. So that just really drove a lot of emphasis on automated testing, right? And making sure that those test results were captured. The cloud became a really, really good place to do that. Other thing that happened about 5 years ago in AWS is this, right? This became the starting point for any moderately sized customer to go into AWS. We call this the multi-account architecture. This is kind of the framework of the multi-account architecture. It is, when we really started moving forward with this was when we launched AWS Control Tower, which kind of made it easier for all this to happen, right? In the few years before that, we definitely saw a lot of customers leaning into multi-account. So like we started in my company I was at before I came to, I'll just call them GE Appliances because they're a big customer, their nameplate, right? We started with one account, and then we realized right away that it's too much. We have one application is potentially breaking the other applications. We have to manage really fine-grained permissions from a security role perspective, right? So we're going to split off HR or finance in this account, and then we'll have this other account for everybody else. And then that slowly we had maybe 3 or 4 or 5, and it was just very, very haphazard at the beginning, right? When we started doing this. There was no single sign-on, really. Like, you could do it, but there was a lot of wiring that you had to do single sign-on at the beginning. And the wiring was so wonky that we ended up like having access keys on all our boxes, right? So we could get into it if the single sign-on blew up. And there was really no good way to share between accounts, right? So remember, AWS started, hey, you have a data center in an account, right? And they were really super worried about the perimeter of those accounts, right? Making sure that those perimeters could not ever be breached. The security of the cloud at the beginning of AWS was paramount. They knew it was going to be paramount to make sure that those accounts aren't going to leak over. And so a ton of engineering went into that because, you know, the compute is it's all shared. The networks are all software defined on AWS, always have been, right? So the first, decade of AWS, make sure the walls make sure it's hardened environment. As the customers started going off into these multi-account environments, we started building the tools, right? So the tools slowly came into being, how you could share resources between accounts, how you could wrap the set of accounts in something called an AWS organization, right? Where you could then have kind of a single kind of root account that would manage this whole organization and be like the organization owner. And then you have organizational units that can drop into this. So this architecture is really the mainstream. Now, for product delivery, there's a whole different pattern. We have a whole walk that we still do to this day about how to organize these OUs and how to organize your accounts and when you should have a different account and when you shouldn't. I don't know why I included this slide twice, but I'll just drop here because there's a lot of great reasons for multi-accounts, right? So business units is a huge one. If you're in an enterprise, you a lot of times you want to know who's billing, who's running the cost centers. So you put one business unit here, one business unit here, so they can go, hey, this guy's charging 10 times as much as you. So they know, because a lot of times they don't, or they're not used to it. Security and compliance is still a big use case for that. Billing entities already covered, yada, yada, yada. So technical isolation, right? The billing, the technology is still isolated. Business process acquisition, this one gets overlooked, but it's definitely like the ability to move accounts into another estate. It's not always easy. It's actually not easy at all. But the fact that you have multiple accounts lets businesses do that, and there are a lot of businesses that do a lot of stuff like that. So there are great reasons for multiple accounts. There's a lot of benefits for doing that. It just really makes this complicated, right? Using these services. If you've done this walk, right? And there are patterns for this, and I'll just walk you through a couple of these. First we have a ton of blogs, right? So if you go off and you Google CI/CD multi-account, you're going to find a lot of stuff, right? Most of it is probably still good because the services have been around. Lately, we've been doing what we call this prescriptive guidance. So this was a way to kind of take a little bit more control back from Google on the blog front, right? So we had a kind of a problem with the blogs, is that the services evolve real fast. Customers go, they find a blog, had a bunch of steps, they go to run it. Everything has changed, right? The screen's changed, the API has changed, right? Or we're in a new version of API. Nobody does it that way anymore because there was a problem. So prescriptive guidance, if you haven't done it, right, it's the one part of AWS you can go into. You can find a lot of patterns. And they are like, we take ownership of the QA and we kind of take that away from Google, right? So if you're looking for multi-account CI/CD, you can start at prescriptive guidance. Anything you're really doing, how do I do this in AWS prescriptive guidance, come to our site, give a search, and you usually find this. All right, so this is like a basic like CI/CD multi-account pipeline, and this is basically said, okay, well I have my code commit repo, right, and I don't want to replicate that in all these accounts, but I want to spit it off into a different account. So here we have an event bridge. Event bridge was CloudWatch events. It's basically a super powerful scalable service bus, right, that can send events. So you drop an event bridge on here when you push to your code commit repo. It fires over into this other account. This other account runs a pipeline. It goes back here with this IAM cross-roll thing, and it gets a KMS key, and it has a cross-account roll for the KMS key. The KMS key has the right resources. It goes in, and everything works. It's cool, right? It has a GitHub or a Git repo that you can use. It's great. It's going to work, right? You might have to customize it. It might not work exactly for your use case, but it works pretty well. Still pretty complicated when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it. This is another one, stack set deployments, right? Stack sets are super powerful in the context of organization, that you can actually take it and blast the whole infrastructure as code change across your entire organization in one kind of click. This pattern talks about how you can use code build to build it and then blast it across dev, test, and prod, kind of as continuous deployment. So this is a cool pattern. Again, there's a lot going on here, right? With the different accounts, the different OUs, the different regions. We make it easier, but there's a lot of boxes and things go wrong, right? Something breaks, somebody breaks something, and then you got to trace it back through the boxes, figure out what's going on. So it's possible. There are tons of customers using code pipeline, code build to do all this stuff, especially if you've really invested in code build and code pipeline, and they're doing it at scale. Amazon has their own internal pipeline thing. If you've built code at Amazon, it's pretty impressive. It really does all this. It's built on AWS itself. So these are tried and true patterns in AWS prescriptive guidance. But really, what we saw is a lot of customers just went and started doing a GitHub. Right? GitHub Actions are super, super powerful. And I'm skipping over Azure DevOps. You guys use Azure DevOps? Yeah. Okay, yep. A lot of people do, right? And it's a nice tool, right? It has it really filled a spot that we didn't fit in, I think, for a while. As far as like just making it easier to code. I think VS Code, we've always had SDK, but anyway, I'm gonna skip over Azure DevOps because my understanding is they're kind of starting to move those guys over to GitHub Actions, right? So GitHub has kind of become the developer space. Azure DevOps, these are some customers I work with. They're like, hey, we're starting to move our stuff from Azure DevOps to GitHub Actions. So if your code's in GitHub, which a lot of our code is, I think, but personal code, if you do anything personally, like open source, it's all, you'll find a ton of stuff on GitHub. Personal projects you're doing are probably on GitHub, right? Enterprise is moving to GitHub. So everybody should have this baseline of GitHub Actions. If you don't, they're super powerful. So basically, the gist of it is, like any build system that I know, you have a YAML file that defines what you need to do to build these actions, right? And it will run sequentially. If it's super sophisticated, you might be able to parallel off some jobs, right? There's a series of steps that you will run when an event triggers your job, and each step will be based on an action. And GitHub has what is essentially a marketplace of these actions, is something like 20,000 different actions. It has actions that we publish, so there are a set of AWS actions, there's a set of GitHub actions, there's actions for probably every single one of the bamboos, and everybody probably has some degree of GitHub actions. They also let third-party people publish actions into GitHub. One of the things you'll know pretty quickly is to kind of look at the action as you're pulling it in and just make sure that people are still using it and it's not abandoned, right? You kind of have to do that, just like you do in the open source. So if you use NPM or you're building code with Python, you're always kind of looking at that library going, is this guy still alive? Like, is he still like enhancing this code and security patching it, or is he dead? Like, go to GitHub repo. Oh, he hasn't committed in 3 years. Right, let's find something else. Cool thing about GitHub Actions, you can really interject them into the developer lifecycle. So like whenever you say push to a branch, create a pull request, these are things that aren't even like, they're really early in the developer lifecycle, right? You can start to run events and codes and do quality checks and lints and look for security scans and all sorts of stuff, right? In addition to your integration tests. So super, super powerful tool. And that's where I think a lot of the world has really gone to. So I'll address this, and then just real quick, because 4 minutes. Okay, there's two. So ultimately, right? GitHub actions are really, really great for running code in GitHub. They will give you compute to an extent for free. As you scale, they will want money, right? So there's 3 different tiers. Where the rubber meets the road a little bit, right? Continuous integration is good if you can pay for it and afford it, or you're working at a small enough scale. Where the rubber meets the road is when you want to start pushing code into the deployment side of things, in AWS, for instance. There are 2. Essentially, you need some compute to run these GitHub actions. You have 2 models. One is the GitHub hosted runners that they just handle for you. That's great. Yeah, they will have the logs. It will be serverless. You can use the actions. It just doesn't have injection into the VPC part of AWS, right? The VPCs are that that IP overlay that you need in an AWS account if you want to do things like run databases or run Kubernetes, right? Those services that were built on traditional IP networks that aren't fully software defined or fully integrated with the AWS, control plane, right? You need the VPC, and then you have the virtual private networks and all the routing fun that goes with it. It's great when you don't have to deal with VPCs, but a lot of us do. When you get to the self-hosted runners, right? So sometimes customers look at this as a cost optimization play, right? They can run their own EC2 instances. EC2 is our virtual machine, right? Everybody knows this, in the cloud. That will give you private VPC access generally. It also gives you a little bit of cost, right? A little bit of cost, a little bit of complexity, because you have servers or containers to manage. The only caveat is you need to build those servers out. You need to give them the ability to access the internet, which for some customers still, they're like, I don't really want that happening. All right, so this is a pattern. This is not the demo I'm going to do today. But the important thing I want to call out here is that this is a pattern that's been done a lot. What happens here is to get GitHub to talk to AWS, you need credentials. In Azure DevOps, and in the beginning of I think GitHub and a lot of GitHub, we had the access key and the secret key, right? And GitHub it has this thing called environments, maps really nicely. You can have a dev and a test and a prod. It has this thing called secrets, where you can say, hey, I want my secret key to be secret. I want my access key to be a secret in GitHub. So it does all that storage for you. The hang up is that we, along with the multi-account, we have moved so hard away from access keys and secret keys, right? So that was the beginning of AWS. And the issue with those, if you have gone through this, right, is that they don't expire. So now there is ways to expire them. They didn't at the beginning. They don't auto-rotate. And if you accidentally, for whatever reason, put your secret keys onto GitHub, right? These are long-lived credentials that live for months, right? Yep. They will very quickly find their way to somebody's hands that will want to do malicious things to your AWS account. And they're getting really good at doing things with them. If you're lucky, you've scoped those keys down to something where they can't really do too much. It's a lot of work still, right? We've made tools make it easier. A lot of people haven't. There's a huge effort for us to say, hey guys, don't have secret keys, don't have access keys anymore, right? We've basically deprecated those from existence, right? You'll still need them in isolated use cases. Software package does backups to the cloud, right? Those kinds will have access keys and secret keys. You shouldn't have any personally. You shouldn't have none of your users, if you're working in groups or teams, none of them should have access keys or secret keys. GitHub scans for those, yeah. Yep. Again, this, I don't know a lot of stuff happened, right? So we know that there's been a problem with those for a while. This still happens where they get compromised. Let's put it that way. So what we would advise to do on this pattern is to use OpenID Connect. Is built on top of the OAuth 2 standard, and GitHub was built on this standard. What you do need to do in your AWS accounts is you need to put in a OpenID provider, and then you need to configure it a little bit to say, okay, so I'm only going to talk to GitHub, and I'm only going to give GitHub these permissions to do this, right? So some customers have the ability to do that, some don't. So for those that can do that, this is a great pattern. Everything can be in GitHub, and this works pretty well. There's a few different ways if you don't have this. So one more slide on this one. If you want to know, there are papers that are out, presentations that we've done in conjunction with GitHub that kind of talk about how all the security goes through, the security configurations that you need to do. I know big customers that are moving from Azure DevOps to GitHub Actions. They're doing this stuff, right? They're making sure they go in, they put these OIDC providers and make sure they have them configured appropriately, but they're blasting them out across the enterprise. Okay. Questions on any of this stuff? All right, so I have a curveball now. This is a tool that I think was marketed a little differently than it should have been. I'm skipping over something called AWS Proton. I'm just going to leave that out there. If you're using Proton, we can talk about it. But this is, I should have made this query. Huh? What's that? AWS Proton. Proton. Proton is like, yeah, you can do some of this stuff. It's like a command line kind of thing where you can do environments. It's still a little bit, it's there, right? People are using it successfully. There's a learning curve. There's another DSL that you put on top of it. For Code Catalyst, there's not. Anybody use Code Catalyst? Okay. Maybe you've put your arms around it, right? Code Catalyst was it was really designed to do a lot of different things, right? So it was designed kind of as a unified software development platform, and it was really marketed that way. And so it has like an issue tracker, right? It has the ability to do dev environments. It does, has Git built into it, and all this stuff. But what it does really, really well is that build, test, deploy part, especially for multi-accounts. All right. It has its own little thing. It doesn't use code pipeline. It doesn't use code build. It has its own actions. Call them Code Catalyst actions. Very similar to what GitHub does. It has a visual builder. I'm going to try to show it to you here. And it's a YAML file, but it has a nice visual builder. The actions are very like AWS specific. So there's like 25 of them that are like amplify hosting or deploy to CloudFormation, deploy to Elastic Container Service, right? Terraform, there's a Terraform action. Like I'm skipping over Terraform. You guys are probably using a lot of Terraform out there. The other thing it can do that's really cool is it can actually invoke GitHub actions. And it can integrate with GitHub repositories and use those as the source for it. And it does that by using GitHub's OAuth credentials, right? So I'll show this to you all today here in a minute. The one thing I'll just give you a quick power overview. I gotta say this, I'm contractually obligated to tell you about generative AI in Code Catalyst and our other products. It can do pull requests. You can tell it to build a feature. It will go off and build a feature for you. You're gonna have to look at the code it generates, but it actually does a pretty good job for enterprise customers only. Yes, there's generative AI in Amazon Q in Code Catalyst. Only in US West 2, which is where Code Catalyst is. Pretty slick. We will not be seeing that today, but we'll be happy to show it to you guys if you really want to see it. All right, so cool thing about Code Catalyst, I'm going to talk and I'll show you. I have time, right? Do we have time? Yeah, we have time. We kind of moved away from everybody needed to be in an AWS account to what we call an AWS Builder's ID. Got a Builder's ID? Anybody got a Builder's ID out there? No, okay. The idea of a Builder's ID is you can have an ID that's not directly tied to an AWS account. Okay, but you can then use that to join other AWS accounts and other projects that might be in people's AWS account. So it just remove that friction of like, hey, I need to work as a developer, but like, do I have to go into an AWS account and learn all this, do all this SSO stuff, and I got to put the guy in my SSO directories? That friction is basically, we're trying to move away with that with this Builder's ID and give those capabilities out. So besides that, right, like I said, there's built-in issue tracker. There's a little built-in, and you can integrate other things. This workflow stuff is really what I wanted to kind of show you. Again, like you've got, it's a simple YAML file. It has simple triggers on your Git repos, right? So the triggers can be push, pull. It actually works with feature branches as well. And you can use it with GitHub Actions. The cool thing about this, right, it works really well. There's a pretty substantial free tier, so if you guys want to follow along with me when I do this demo, you won't be charged anything because there's a pretty decent free tier unless you've already done it. And goes with GitHub, and it's all pretty tightly integrated, right? So the way that it reaches out and deploys to other accounts is actually really streamlined, really slick and easy because you have a handshake that happens at the beginning, and there's not much more to it. And then you can really automate these deployments once you get your stuff out there. Has dev environments that you can do. I always had a problem with dev environments, maintaining other people's dev environments, so you can define a dev environment, support that. Really got marketed as this project blueprint thing, right? Like, here, I'm just gonna show it to you guys. All right. I'm probably gonna need Wi-Fi. Any questions? Hello?
Wi-Fi is just WCCnet? No.
Yeah, okay. Okay, am I good? All right. Oops, I'm already logged in. All right. Well, I think that's good. I can take you through the here, let me just do this instead. All right, so first thing you notice, right, we're not in any kind of AWS account. I'm going to sign up for a new Builder's ID. Oh, crap. I bet I'm not here. I'm probably gonna get the demo. Because is my phone gonna get it or not? Let's see here. No connection. Nobody wants a box while this is happening? Where's my thing? What?
Pressure's getting to me. Sorry, so now I have my builder's ID. I'm going to create my Code Catalyst ID. And it's going to prompt me to create my first space. Put it in Oregon. This is the first time, so all this stuff has so far been independent of the AWS account. Now, I do have, obviously, a series of AWS accounts of my own. Everybody should have one, I think, right? At this point. Costs nothing. You do have to put a credit card in. We do have a very substantial free tier, very generous, in my opinion, free tier. And pretty generous charges. So all this stuff has a pretty nice free tier that you'll see, but I'm going to go ahead and hook it up to my account here. So let's, oh boy. Everybody has two-factor authentication on their AWS account, right? Is it possible to do without? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here, I'm going to grab this. Now, at this point, so once you put the AWS account in, there's really two ways. So again, now, I've already logged into AWS. I have access to my own AWS account. So I'm going to go to the AWS account to verify. It's going to be, okay. It'll be select, if you like you don't want to have access to your AWS account for whatever reason, or you have like the AWS guy, right? You can just copy that token and give it to them to get in here. But yeah, the Code Catalysts are tied to an AWS account. Whoops. What did I do? Really? Okay, here. All right, so I'm going to hit this here. It's going to pop in. It's going to say it's valid and gives me the ability to create this role. I don't need it. I just need to say, yes, okay, I'm running this space in this AWS account. It's for billing, right? So all the billing is then tied to this account. Again, there's a pretty generous free tier. All the billing is there. Cool thing here, right? You'll notice is I'm in Code Catalyst at AWS. So if I go and change into different AWS accounts, I'm going to stay logged into this. It's a completely different path, right? And it makes your life a lot easier. I'm going to skip for now, and I'll create a project. I'll show you kind of what's in here. All right, so your Code Catalyst, every user has spaces. One to more spaces, you can be invited into another user space with your builder's ID. So if we were to collaborate, let's say we're working on an app, right? I say, okay, I'm gonna run it in my space. I'll invite you, and you, right? I'll come in and send you an email, or you give me your builder's ID. I'll let you in my space, right? So it's a good way to collaborate on that one. Spaces have 0 to many projects and a handful of activities. So let me see what we got here. So you can add your AWS accounts. I'm going to do that in a minute. You can connect Code Catalyst through to your VPCs once you connect accounts. Again, it's a big deal. And unlike the GitHub stuff, it's all going to happen inside the AWS control plane. So this is a service running in the AWS, although it's the control space is outside. You've got billing monitor here, active menus. So here's what we give you for free, right? 2,000 minutes of compute. Compute is going to be used when you build your app, right? 2,000 minutes a month for free. of build, right? We give you 10 gigs of storage, and that is internal storage. If you actually link Code Catalyst to GitHub repository, you're actually not using the storage. If you're using our dev environments, hosted dev environments, 60 hours a month, and dev environment storage 64. So these two are the ones you burn through if you follow what I do, and I think they're pretty generous. You can turn on your generative AI stuff if you want to do that. But what I'll do here first is I'm going to go and look at our extensions. So these are what we call extensions, and you'll see essentially they're going to allow us to integrate with all these other places. So I'll just install the GitHub repo. It tells me the permissions it's going to install, and then it's going to take me to my GitHub account. And again, I hope my Wi-Fi is going to let me into the GitHub Authenticator. Actually, I think I need to use. I'm not going to get it in here because it's. But you know what? Let's try this again. Oops. Oh, no, I just put it on Authenticator. I completely forgot about that. You guys didn't see that, right? All right, so in here, these are all my repos. I can select, see what repo did I actually have this in. July 2024. You can have it do all the repositories or just select ones. Again, didn't always work like this. I think July 2024 is the right one. Yep. And save this. You can do it, baby. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So at this point then, I'm going to go create my first project. And when Code Catalyst was first marketed, and it still is kind of marketed, it was really, we really emphasize these blueprints, and they are really powerful. So if you build these projects on blueprints, they will generate a full app for you, like a sample app, a full pipeline for deployment, actually deploy the initial app for the first time. So build all the infrastructure you need in AWS, right? Along with the pipeline. So it's again, like the first thing we did where, we wrapped infrastructure as code around everything. So this wraps up all that stuff. And then actually, as I'll show you here in a bit, it makes it pretty easy to then deploy that application into different accounts. So having a dev test prod account, pretty easy. So we really emphasize these blueprints when we started, and they are really, really powerful. Like if you wanted to do a LLM playground, right? Work with large language models on AWS, click this one, you go here, and it will build this thing out for you. It will give you a repo where you can go and start customizing it out, right? It's all in the box. It's all really, really cool. So we have that. We have a lot of generative AI stuff. We have .NET applications, microservices, Glue, right? We actually have code pipelines here in here that will deploy to ECS with canaries and all that other stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring my own code in because I already have an existing code in GitHub. So I've got my meetup. Call this meetup project.
So, a quick question.
Yeah.
So the templates, does that also include the database, the DDLs and everything else?
Yeah.
And if you want to change them to a different database?
Yeah. So generally they do.
Okay.
Yeah. The templates can include really anything that you want, and they are. So they come with pipelines, and the pipelines / workflows are actually really powerful. So you could have an action that says runs, what is flyway, something like that, to build, to run data definition language, to run data manipulation language. Absolutely. The blueprints actually feature. I don't know what is going on. I hope it's just going to happen, right? The blueprints actually, you can, if you're on the enterprise tier, you can actually build custom blueprints based on our own blueprints. They're TypeScript essentially. Blueprints are in TypeScript.
Also, if you have time later on, can you talk about the CI/CD as far as database, DDLs goes?
Yeah. Kind of outside the scope of what we have, right?
So the problem that we have is that when we change the database, then everything has to be tested.
Yeah.
That's really a nightmare. Okay.
It's always a challenge. I think you might, some of these practitioners might have some tips for you. For us, it was always the challenge of how much do you bring into your test cases, and I know some people want to clone their whole production database over and run that QA with that. So that's a big practice. I was always a real big proponent of mocks, right? So my team heard me complain about unit test cases and test coverage a ton, right? And I made it more of a design problem for my developers, because I didn't want them to worry about the database backend. I'll tell you, I love DynamoDB, right? Or these serverless services where you don't have to really, SQL, I did it a ton, right? I was a DBA in a past life. If you're doing that, it becomes a little more complicated. Anyway, I digress. I wasn't prepared to talk about that today. It's a real deep and interesting topic for sure. I wonder if we could figure something out. Harper or somebody else can come and talk about that one later. But yeah, do you think this actually ran? What do you think happened here? It's normally not at 22%, and that's interesting to me. What if I just reload? Is it happy? Do I have a project? I do not. Okay, let's try that again. Let's try that again. Okay, all right, there we go. All right, so this repository was just a real simple, this is a simple Vite app, right? It's React Vite. You notice it clicks me out to LinkedIn. So it's just a basic. I literally did one commit this morning. And if you were to pull it down locally and run it, it's probably public. It would just say, hello world, update me, right? I did want to show a couple things. So first off, the concept of CI/CD. We have workflows, of which there are none. If you started with a blueprint, there would be a workflow. We have the concept of environments, and that's where we're going to create some new environments. All right, so I'm going to create a dev and a prod. You see we have none today. If we're going to deploy this one, we need a dev and a prod, right? So do dev. Do I need to? Okay, we're going to connect to a new account here. So this is inside. So I'm just going to say, okay, I'll connect using my dev account here. Get out of here. All right, it gives me a token here and a way to set up in the console. So let's see. I'm going to first, because I know it's going to happen, I'm going to first log into my dev account. This tool I'm showing you is AWS IAM Identity Center, also known as AWS Single Sign-On. It is part of that whole organizations thing that we showed at the beginning, right? Make it easy if you're managing multiple accounts to log into the account that you want to be in. And I'm going to complete the setup in the console. So if I click this now, I should be good to go. Drops me in, verifies my token, make sure I'm in my dev account. I am, and I'll verify my space. Okay. So I've now created and populated a dev account, I think. Let's see, should be good. I do need an IAM role. So this is where your security guys come in. This is a one-time only setup. You need basically the role that Code Catalyst is going to use to deploy code into your environment. So these environments of Code Catalyst are for deploying code. Generally, the build will be on self-managed, although there are various ways you can, if you need to drop a build into for VPC for database access, let's say you can run the build inside your VPC. Anyway, so I'm just going to use this Code Catalyst administrator policy, right? Let Code Catalyst do everything because I trust myself. And I could, so now I'm good to set up. I've got a dev environment with an IAM role. I can repeat the same thing for prod if I wanted to, although I think we're almost out of time, so I'm not going to do that. The idea here is that you can put all your environments in here. You have this one-time handshake in your space, and then the ability to create environments in here. So now that I have that done, I can create a dev environment. I can use my dev account. I can use my dev role, and if you want a VPC, you can actually do that. So here's my dev environment. From here, I can create just a simple workflow. You pick which repository and which branch you're going to store in. Create that. If you want to follow along, I don't know if you guys can scan this code at all. This is a blog that's essentially take a Code Catalyst repository, deploy it to Amplify in 10 minutes. And you can do it in 10 minutes if you do all the setup I did ahead of time. Amplify hosting, if you're doing a web kind of app that's serverless, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful solution for just fully managed hosting. React apps, Next.js support has gotten a lot better. Angular apps and a handful of other frameworks. Anyway, so I have actions here. You see I have actions that are Code Catalyst or GitHub. GitHub, so these are, the GitHub catalog is not fully featured, right? We just have ones that we've basically curated here, but we also have GitHub script, simple scripts for the GitHub client, and GitHub actions, right? So you can basically add GitHub actions from the GitHub marketplace into your flow. And remember, we did that OAuth connection, right, already between Code Catalyst space and GitHub, right? So you can integrate GitHub actions into your flow, which is great. Common pattern, right, might be, it's my suggestion, GitHub does the things that are in GitHub. The on pull requests, we're linting, right? We're doing some quality checks, we're doing some testing, and Code Catalyst could potentially do the deployment actions. That's a suggestion that keeps you out of doing the OAuth complicated handshake between GitHub and Code Catalysts, right? Keeps all of the credentials for deploying to your environments inside of Code Catalyst. So I have a build. I'm just going to pull this in here. So bam. I can go to the YAML here, but I'm going to start here. In configuration, you can run in a Lambda function or EC2, pretty slick. I don't need an environment, but if you needed an environment for VPC, you can run it. And then just here, it's just real simple YAML. I'm going to do npm install, right? And npm run build, right? Simple. That's all, right? It's basically a script. Okay, here. I need my code catalyst lambda image. So it builds in a Docker container. The Docker containers will generally contain, if you've used code build, right? They contain like every 6 or 7 or 8 different programming languages and the package managers and all that other good stuff. And I'm going to, from the output of this, just, what's wrong with that? Okay, good. That is good. And then I'm gonna add an amplify, build in deploy to amplify, so bam. All right, right now it's parallel. It's not gonna be parallel for long. It's gonna depend on the build action. And we're gonna build it in Lambda. Yes, I know, okay. Dev, we're gonna deploy this out to dev, and we're gonna build a whole new app. So we'll call this Meetup Today. I'm gonna pick an AWS region to deploy it to. I'm gonna deploy it to East 1, and we'll wait for deployment to happen. Let's see, what else do we need? Oh, we need this to be dist, I think. One thing I'm not going to show you today is it actually does test reports. This reports thing is for test reports. If you set those up, those are really, really easy to set up. So now I have a simple pipeline built using this AWS build action and then deploy to Amplify hosting. I'm going to commit. And this should push it out to my main branch in AWS or in GitHub. And it should also kick off the pipeline because the pipeline itself is a commit. Let's see, did it go? Yep. So very similar again to GitHub. Your workflows are kept in this code catalyst /workflows. They're represented as a YAML file, which you can tweak if the visual editor is too much for you. And then it's going to kick off and run it right away. When this gets done, if I'm right, we should have an application deployed that we can access. The one thing I might have glossed over is the trigger. So here it's a trigger on the main branch. So a real common pattern, of course, would be to have a dev branch that goes to dev environments, main goes to prod environment, or maybe you have a main goes to dev and a prod branch that goes to prod. Just kind of that branch-based development is a real common pattern. Wildcards are also supported in the branches here, so I could do branch, feature /star or something like that. That gets a little bit more complicated, but it's possible in the context of this tool. Have a question from? No, there's not really a chain of thought. It's just just random fire memory here.
Yeah, really, really cool. The power of the AWS Catalyst seems really amazing. Particularly interesting topic for me because of the concept of platform engineering and kind of this rise of what people are calling internal developer platforms, where kind of taking the cognitive load off of the software delivery teams to just give them patterns that the enterprise agrees that this is the way we're going to deploy things. Are you seeing enterprises or even medium or small size shops leveraging Catalyst as almost an internal developer tool? I mean, can it be that, or am I?
And it could, if we got over the hump, right? Like the patterns themselves are TypeScript, right? The concept is that has always been that you can evolve those patterns and you can like have a platform, a blueprint team that updates the blueprints, and then that update can get pulled into all the downstream projects, right? Which I think a lot of enterprise customers were interested in. How do I enforce templates, right? And make templates easy for developers to use. The technology is built on, it has a pretty steep learning curve. It's a lot of the same technology we use internally in Amazon. And so,
Yeah, even the GUI you saw, I wouldn't expect like your run-of-the-mill product manager or dev to go into this interface and click around and be able to do all that. Even the UI looked like there was some things you need to be aware of that could be, potentially harmful or dangerous. But I see the potential with the product. It's really powerful.
yeah, I like it as, so this use case, I think, wasn't there, right? It took a while to be like, oh, we have a build system that fits nicely with GitHub Actions. Again, I'm not demonstrating that, but like, and makes the multi-account bit. I'm going to ask you to bear with me because I could go in and create multiple environments and have multiple workflows and workflows that run into different environments, right? Makes that easier, right? And so just that use case to me is just really powerful way for things to work, right? Other uses, they're evolving, right? Like so we have pull requests. The tools that we're launching in this space, our goal for this, a lot of these next gen developer tools has always been to be developer focused and just bring people into the community, right? So for us, like Builder's ID came out of, it was a long conversation about should we have Builder's ID or how do we do it, right? I think this tool came from the same space where, hey, there's going to be a free tier. There's a concept of blueprints is there, but at the same time, it was really like, how do we make it easier for people to go from zero to like, hey, I want to deploy something on AWS, right? Like blueprints are a great way to do that, right?
And one last follow-up question, hopefully a quick one, where it's, will this actually build out a brand new VPC for you? Or do you have to have some of that fundamental stuff established in your account before Catalyst can, like if I just had a blank account, could I say, hey, I want a 3-tier VPC,
Yeah.
I want load balancer, I want, data tier, this will just do it all?
Sure. Yeah. So there is action. So I skipped over the actions. There is an action to run CloudFormation. There's an action to run CDK.
Okay.
All you need is that IAM role, that account connection, the IAM role, and that IAM role has to have permissions to build your VPCs and all that other stuff, right? So sometimes that third part is a sticking point for customers, right? Still, for good reason. Like in these big VPCs and multi-account environments, are a whole another like ball of wax. But yeah, you absolutely can run infrastructure as code in the workflows. So here I go here. Just digging into my run. My run is successful. I have a Vue app that, if I did everything correctly, is my Vue React app. Thank you. I didn't know it was gonna work, and I'm right on time too, right?
Yeah.
Is it 8 o'clock that we got?
Question
right.
for you.
Thank you.
Question for you.
Yeah.
So it is cool.
Thank you.
But as I look through and try to build out our own pipelines, I find I'm continuously adding layers to the stack. Is this adding another layer, or is it meant to replace specific products?
Is it adding another layer, or is it meant to replace?
Are there any things I can stop paying attention to if I use this?
I mean, the workflow might evolve over time, right? In this case, it is canonically part of the repository that you build, right? So that concept, I think, is something we've been trying to emphasize and bridge, like this concept of a mono repo. For us, like, we're super happy if your infrastructure is in one repo, and if your pipeline is part of the infrastructure, that's awesome, right? Like, everything should be defined, and when you have it like this, ideally, right, you could this is discoverable by Code Catalyst, and the blueprints is this way, right? If you run a blueprint, your pipeline is there, and the reason it's there is because it has this template workflow that it generates as part of it. So, I don't know if that answers your question or not, actually.
I'm not sure. Like, there's code build, code deploy, code pipeline.
Yeah, none of that.
Code Catalyst replacing the pipeline?
No. Those services are gonna live, right? Like, they're used in production a lot of different places. For me, this is an easier journey from like AWS 100 to like, how do I build an app in AWS, right? Are there edge cases and scalability cases where we couldn't do it? Could we do some real complex and wacky stuff with it? Like, this thing is only in this region and this thing is something different. I mean, I think you can make it real robust and real complicated. I haven't thought about how to like break it and where you would use one or the other at all. But yeah, this is a completely separate build system right now, right? And that's what's actually pretty cool about it.
So if you're doing something greenfield, you could start with all this.
Yeah, we built this. This was a reInvent 2022 launch, right? And I was excited to come here and just maybe surprise people that Doug did this, because I think it just was kind of under the radar. Like, there's so much that happens in the week after Thanksgiving when everybody's still eating leftover turkey, right? Yeah.
So if you had a new customer that was looking to get, build out their first CI/CD, are you as a solutions architect saying you should check out Code Catalyst? Or are you saying, or is it like a crawl, walk, run? Do we want to? I know every organization is different, but like, just what's your opinion? I'm a new business. I want to get going with all the bells and whistles on AWS. Are you saying, should I start with AWS Catalyst?
Yeah, I would show it to them for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Would you suggest they use it in production?
You could use it in production, yeah.
Would you suggest it?
Would I suggest it? Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yep.
You set this up. It is associated with an IAM role in your account, right? Now, suppose that you give me write access to your repo, and I push a change to main. Will the pipeline run?
I give you access to a repo, you commit to the repo, pipeline runs. Yes. Pipeline runs on a commit to main, right? So it's based on this trigger. There's a whole description of what this syntax actually is. Let me see if I can modify the trigger. I think it's push, pull request, workflows. I don't know if you need to see that or not, but.
I think I got the gist of the basics of of what the pipeline is doing in this particular case. I was just curious about, for instance, can one user set it up in association with their AWS account and then take responsibility for other people using things through GitHub, but not in association with an AWS account?
Yeah.
It's yours. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I can invite people to my space, right? This is the beauty of the builders. Let me see.
Oh, yeah, right. So, I mean, that's, but this is, in this case, it's a little different. I'm not talking about inviting people to your space on Code Catalyst, but instead you invite them to the repo, or you give them write permissions to the repo. Will it wind up using your Code Catalyst account?
It's a use case, somebody goes into GitHub, commits to my repo on this repo on GitHub. There is a webhook, quote unquote, that fires off to Code Catalyst, and yeah, we'll rerun the pipeline. Yeah, so
Awesome.
that whole dance is I'm going to say webhook. It might not be a webhook. It might be whatever the new thing is. Yep.
Sweet, thank you.
Yep. Well, I appreciate you guys coming out. I'll stick around if there's any other questions. But thanks to Harper for coming up with the idea. We were talking, she said this would be a good topic. And Jamie, Mike, and anybody that sat through this, thank you guys so much. And let's keep it going. So it's great to see people out here. I hope we can make this something regular thing. So thank you guys.